Welcome to our channel. We are here with another video. The Atlantic slave trade stands as one of the most abhorrent episodes in human history, a period marked by the systematic exploitation, commodification, and dehumanization of millions of Africans for economic gain. Spanning over 4 centuries, this transatlantic commerce in human lives was driven by a relentless pursuit of profit and power, leaving a trail of devastation and suffering that reverberates through the annals of time. In this comprehensive exploration, we delve into the origins, mechanics, and consequences of the Atlantic slave trade, shedding light on the profound impact it had on the world then and its enduring legacy today. Origins of the Atlantic slave trade. The roots of the Atlantic slave trade can be traced back to the European exploration and colonization of the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. As European powers such as Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands established colonies in the New World, they faced a pressing need for labor to cultivate cash crops such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Initially, indigenous peoples were enslaved and exploited, but diseases, warfare, and mistreatment decimated their populations, leading to a search for alternative sources of labor. The triangular trade, mechanics of human trafficking. The Atlantic slave trade operated within the framework of the triangular trade, a complex network of commerce that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The trade routes formed a triangle, with goods such as firearms, textiles, and alcohol transported from Europe to Africa in exchange for enslaved Africans. These captives were then transported across the Middle Passage, enduring horrific conditions aboard overcrowded and unsanitary slave ships, before being sold in the Americas. The profits from the sale of enslaved people were used to purchase commodities such as sugar, tobacco, and coffee, which were then shipped back to Europe to complete the triangular cycle. The Middle Passage, a journey of death and despair. The Middle Passage was the grueling voyage across the Atlantic Ocean endured by enslaved Africans bound for the Americas. Packed tightly into the holds of slave ships, often in chains and subjected to brutal treatment by ship crews, the captives suffered immensely during the journey. Disease, malnutrition, and suicide were rampant, and mortality rates were shockingly high. Countless lives were lost at sea, their bodies discarded overboard as mere cargo. The Middle Passage represented the epitome of human suffering and degradation, a harrowing ordeal that left an indelible mark on those who survived and the generations that followed. Impact on African societies. The Atlantic slave trade had a profound and multifaceted impact on the societies of Africa. The widespread practice of slavery disrupted traditional social structures, leading to conflicts and instability within African communities. Powerful kingdoms and chieftaincies emerged, engaging in warfare and raiding neighboring territories to capture slaves for sale to European traders. The demand for slaves fueled economic growth in some regions while perpetuating cycles of violence and exploitation in others. Additionally, the loss of millions of able-bodied individuals to the slave trade depleted African populations and hindered the continent's development, leaving a legacy of underdevelopment that persists to this day. Resistance and rebellion. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, enslaved Africans resisted their captivity in myriad ways, from subtle acts of defiance to outright rebellion. Some escaped from plantations and formed marooned communities in remote areas, where they lived as free people beyond the reach of slave owners. Others engaged in acts of sabotage, feigning illness, damaging equipment, or slowing down their work pace to undermine the profitability of slavery. Large-scale revolts, such as the Haitian Revolution, demonstrated the potential for enslaved people to overthrow their oppressors and assert their humanity. These acts of resistance challenged the legitimacy of slavery and played a crucial role in its eventual abolition. Abolition and legacy. The abolition of the Atlantic slave trade and the institution of slavery itself was the result of decades of activism, advocacy, and struggle by enslaved people, abolitionists, and reformers alike. The horrors of the Middle Passage and the brutality of plantation life were brought to light through abolitionist literature, speeches, and political campaigns, sparking public outrage and galvanizing support for abolitionist causes. The transatlantic slave trade was officially abolished in the early 19th century, though the legacy of slavery continued to shape social, economic, and political dynamics in the Americas and beyond. Economic impact of the Atlantic slave trade. The economic impact of the Atlantic slave trade was profound and far-reaching, shaping the development of nations and continents for centuries to come. The trade in enslaved Africans fueled the growth of industries such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton in the Americas, contributing to the accumulation of vast wealth for European colonizers and slave owners. The influx of wealth generated by the slave trade stimulated economic growth in Europe, financing infrastructure projects, and fueling the expansion of colonial empires. However, The benefits of this economic prosperity were unevenly distributed, with enslaved Africans bearing the brunt of exploitation and suffering. Social and cultural ramifications. The Atlantic slave trade left an indelible imprint on the social and cultural fabric of the Americas and Europe, shaping attitudes and beliefs about race, identity, and power. The institution of slavery entrenched systems of racial hierarchy and white supremacy, perpetuating inequalities that persist to this day. The legacy of slavery is evident in the enduring disparities in wealth, education, and opportunity between racial and ethnic groups, as well as in the persistence of racist ideologies and practices. Additionally, the trauma of slavery continues to reverberate through the descendants of enslaved Africans, shaping their experiences of identity, belonging, and intergenerational trauma. Psychological trauma and generational wounds. The psychological trauma inflicted by the Atlantic slave trade has left deep and lasting scars on the descendants of enslaved Africans. The experience of slavery, with its brutality, violence, and dehumanization, inflicted profound psychological and emotional trauma on enslaved individuals and their descendants. This trauma has been passed down through generations, manifesting in various forms of psychological distress, including depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Additionally, the legacy of slavery has contributed to intergenerational cycles of poverty, dysfunction, and social marginalization, further exacerbating the psychological toll on affected communities. Racism and the legacy of slavery. The Atlantic slave trade laid the groundwork for the emergence of modern racism, perpetuating stereotypes and prejudices that continue to shape social relations and institutional practices. The dehumanization of enslaved Africans was justified through racist ideologies that depicted them as inferior and undeserving of freedom and equality. These racist attitudes and beliefs were instrumental in maintaining systems of slavery and segregation, as well as in justifying colonial conquest and exploitation. The legacy of racism continues to plague societies around the world, perpetuating inequalities and injustices based on race, ethnicity, and skin color. Contemporary perspectives and reckoning with the past. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need to confront the legacies of slavery and racism and to reckon with the ongoing consequences of historical injustices. Movements such as Black Lives Matter have brought issues of racial inequality and police brutality to the forefront of public consciousness, sparking widespread protests and calls for systemic change. Efforts to memorialize the victims of slavery and to commemorate their contributions to society have gained momentum, with initiatives such as the National Museum of African American History and Culture in the United States serving as powerful symbols of remembrance and reconciliation. Lessons from history and building a just future. As we confront the legacy of the Atlantic slave trade, we are reminded of the enduring power of human resilience and resistance in the face of oppression. The stories of courage and perseverance exhibited by enslaved Africans and their descendants serve as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the capacity for positive change. By learning from the lessons of history and confronting the uncomfortable truths of the past, we can work towards building a more just and equitable future for all. This requires acknowledging the ongoing impact of slavery and racism, dismantling systems of oppression and inequality, and striving to create a world where every individual is valued, respected, and afforded equal rights and opportunities. Conclusion. The Atlantic slave trade stands as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and exploitation, as well as the resilience and resistance of those subjected to oppression. From its origins in the European conquest of the Americas to its eventual abolition in the face of growing moral outrage and activism, the slave trade left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the course of history and leaving a legacy of trauma, injustice, and inequality that persists to this day. By confronting the brutal realities of the past and acknowledging the enduring consequences of slavery, we can strive to build a more just and equitable future for all.